Welcome to part 3 of week 2, Signs and Symbols, Enhancing Science Instruction Through Literacy in the MCCS Era. Today we're going to be talking briefly about using digital media as part of science. So as we think about the role of texts in doing science, we can't overlook the fact that many of the text resources that our students now access are presented in digital formats and often accessed online. Therefore, we need to take a look at how working with and learning from digital texts may alter our definitions of what it means to read and write. So this brief course segment will provide you with an overview of this topic in preparation for a more in-depth reading. So what is digital media? When we think about digital media, a variety of resources may come to mind. Things like blogs or wikis, online search engines that provide us with access to a multitude of digital texts, simulations, videos, and online tools to create concept maps, charts, or graphs are all examples of the kinds of digital media that our students now have access to. These different forms of digital media can be used effectively to learn and represent scientific ideas and information. And obviously this list that I've given you is far from exhaustive. Before moving on to the next slide, you might want to take a minute to think about what other digital sources are important in science or in your classroom that we haven't mentioned here. So feel free to pause now and do that if you would like. So when we think about using digital information sources, we also need to think about evaluating these sources. Given that, at this point anyway, virtually anyone can publish digital media on the web, it is important that we consider with our students how we assess these resources in terms of their validity and reliability. In thinking about this, learners also need to think about whether new information makes sense in terms of their prior knowledge or current understanding of a topic. So this whole idea that we're trying to integrate what we already know with what we're learning from these digital sources. Along with this, there are some important questions that students can ask themselves as they are utilizing digital resources. Things like, is this source reliable and how do I know? This can include things such as what kind of site is the information coming from? Is it a .com, a .edu, and what does it mean to have a different sort of ending? When was the site published and when was the site last updated? Is the information current? Does a particular company or advertiser sponsor the digital resource? There are many other possibilities to consider as well, but this idea leads into another big question. We need to think about who the author is and what his or her purpose is in writing and posting or publishing this text or this digital resource. And related to this is the idea of what are the potential influences or biases in what the author is writing. And this also relates to the MCCS. One thing that's important for readers to be able to do is to think about an author's purpose for writing and what potential influences or biases there may be. Finally, we can think about looking at a variety of sources and do they confirm or contradict one another? And if they do, how can I go about resolving these conflicts? For example, if I'm looking at a bunch of different websites or maybe a website and a simulation or another graphic, how many sources support one idea versus another? And why might sources have different perspectives or different ideas? So these are all things that we need to think about when we're thinking about digital media. Next, maintaining focus with digital media is also important for our learners and something that can be challenging for them. So just as when reading any text, learners will need guidance on how to maintain their focus when learning with digital media. Maintaining focus may even be more critical in this case, given that digital environments and resources can sometimes be additionally distracting for students. Some potential ways to help students maintain focus include using authentic questions to guide work with digital resources. These questions should be interesting and relevant for students. For example, maybe something related to their community, a passion of theirs, or something that they find fun. I know with some students that I work with, I find roller coasters and designing roller coasters to be particularly motivating for middle school students. Help students to set meaningful goals for reading and navigating the text. These can include distinguishing among reading for and checking understanding versus simply copying information from different sites and sources. We can also think about the idea of knowledge construction versus information gathering, right? Is my goal just to find an answer to a particular question on one website, or am I really focusing on how different websites or different sources of media are informing one another and trying to create a coherent representation of what all of these resources are saying? So another thing that can be helpful for our students is engaging in metacognition, and this is something we'll talk more about when we're talking about theoretical perspectives, but we can ask questions like, what is my purpose for reading this? Are these sources giving me the information that I need? So just like with printed text, again, this is particularly important in digital environments. And then finally, helping students to understand the relationship to other activities. So how is this reading or writing activity related to the larger unit, right? Related to what we're learning about. How is it related, again, to things that I already know, and really helping them to make those connections both among digital sources, but also among the different things that are going on in the unit or lesson. Using text features is another important aspect of learning from digital texts and other digital resources. Features of digital text can be used to orient the reader and to help with comprehension. So when we're thinking about using things like websites, simulations, wikis, blogs, even video or audio, we need to help our students to understand the different affordances of these different forms of digital mediums and how they can use those affordances to their advantage when it comes to understanding the information. So some questions that can be helpful to address and even model for students how we might go about answering these include things like, how is the text structured? How do how do we use the structure of this resource to help us comprehend what it is trying to tell us? How do we navigate through the text or the simulation or whatever digital resource it is that we're using? So helping learners to understand how to navigate different digital resources and how the features of the digital environment can be used to help increase understanding and allow them to reach their learning goals can be particularly beneficial for students. We may assume that since they probably use many of these resources at home, that they know how to learn from them effectively, when really research shows that that is not true. So, for example, something like the physicsforkids.com site that we have here, helping students to understand how to use the links, even the links in the text. So the idea that the important words are highlighted, things that are related to the mechanics of motion here. There's an overview along the side where they can go to different things like forces, vectors, velocity, momentum. So just helping them to think about how the different affordances of the environment can be used based on what their learning goal is. So related to that, we also need to think about integrating multiple digital resources and representations. Different forms of digital media can be used to communicate the same idea or message. Stressing this idea to students and supporting them in evaluating how the same idea is expressed through different mediums, as well as teaching them to use a variety of media to communicate their ideas, is essential. And this is also a component of the Montana Common Core standards. So if we look here, we see that we have different representations of the water cycle. We have part of a website that has links to different things related to the water cycle. It also has a graphic down there We have a simulation related to the water cycle. We have some videos and a couple of different graphical representations. So talking about our students about how to integrate what all of these sources are saying is also something that needs to be a focus if we're trying to enhance literacy in science. And then finally, we can talk about producing digital media. Remember, students need help with technical as well as aesthetic skills when they're thinking about how best to represent a message. And again, this is another important part of the MCCS, helping our students not only to take in information or to comprehend it, but also to produce information to effectively communicate a message. So we can think about things like blogging, maybe making a PowerPoint or some kind of Prezi, video, simulations, graphs and charts, writing a wiki, maybe instead of a standard report, doing some sort of more interactive digital text. But again, we need to realize that we need to help our students understand how to use these resources, but also when the best time to use these resources might be in terms of communicating a message. So don't assume that students know how to utilize digital media to represent ideas in a variety of ways. Help them to coordinate multiple means of representation to effectively communicate meaning. So this has been a very brief overview. Now we're going to move more into thinking about supporting digital literacies in your classroom. With what we've just discussed in mind, please read Karchmer, Klein, and Sheena's Guiding Principles for Supporting New Literacies in Your Classroom. It goes more in depth into some of the things that we've just talked about. And as you read this article, please think about your own practices with digital resources in your science classroom, including things that you do well and things that you feel you'd like to improve. Thank you.